Aburi Accord, Ojukwu, and Decree number 8. On Monday, we started talking about Aburi Revisited. And we went all the way back to, the events that led to the Aburi Accord. And we are having that conversation because, I put a video out last week, and somebody went there and was chatting up about Aburi. And again, it's a shame that when people talk about Aburi, they talk about it as though they are still in 1967. Like all the things that happened, in fact, not just 67 January, February. All that has happened since March of 67 is as though they never happened. And one of the ways I know that people have never really heard of these things is because when you say these things, they curse you out. But the smart ones among them will say grok if he's on Twitter. They'll say grok, they'll grok it or whatever. And of course, after grok gives them the information, they'll not be able to say anything anymore. But the ones that want to insult you will still insult you because that's DNA. So the point really is that a lot of us may not have heard about it before, or maybe we know, but maybe we still need to have a refresher course, so to speak. So that's why we're doing this. So we talk about Aburi and what led to it. Now, if you want to know what led to Aburi Accord, please go to our YouTube channel and watch Aburi Revisited. Is in the live section. You'll be able to see all of that. So I'm not going to go back to everything we've discussed so far. I'm just going to continue from where we stopped. I still have to mention some of the things we talked about anyway. So rather than start from January, I just start somewhere in September into January of 67, rather than start in January of 66. So we know that the coup, the counter coup, all those things, led to terrible events that happened up until August 1st, when Gowon was installed as the head of state. We said, of course, that there was a coup in January. It was an Igbo coup, January 15 of 66. There was a coup in July. It was a northern coup, July 29 of 66. And it was basically payback for what happened in January. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just what it is. It was payback. Now, after that happened, they had an issue choosing who was going to be the head of state. And eventually, they were going to actually break out of the country. And I think people don't appreciate that as much. But it's something that we should actually talk about some other time. All right, so this is something that we should probably talk about because we need to appreciate the fact that the Northerners were not planning to become another Igbo or become another Irosi. They actually had that coup in order to break the country apart. That's why they called it Araba. It was about destroying the whole thing, just have a Northern Republic. But they were prevailed upon by the British High Commissioner, the American Ambassador, Nigeria's AGF, people like Kashim, people in the civil service, senior civil service, especially those from the north, were able to persuade the officers, and so they abandoned the idea of seceding and decided to appoint somebody to lead Nigeria. So they appointed the man who eventually became General Gowon. So Gowon became the head of state on August 1st. August 2nd, he released Awolowo from prison. By 12th of August, he had put out the Gazette. That same month, he organized something called the Ad Hoc Conference, where they brought the leaders of thought from every region. But Ojukwu made sure that his own people did not go. This was in September. All right. Around that period, of course, things that happened in July into August, terrible stuff in the north. Of course, essentially payback for what happened in January, but it was still terrible regardless. People were sent back home. A lot of people had returned to the east, and they went with news of terrible things that happened to them. When their own people in the east heard about it, they attacked the northerners in the east. Now, people don't talk about it, but trust me, these things are written in books. And they didn't only do it in the east; they also did it in the Midwest. Okay, but in the east, they killed northerners en masse, right, in the hundreds. Okay, so things happened. Did you read it the other day? I read it in passing. I don't want to make it a topic, but I read it in passing. They killed people in Umaya, in Owerri, in Port Harcourt, in Imo, in Enugu, in Oboluafo. A lot of people from the north were unalived, and that provoked another kind of reaction. So what happened was that certain people were there who were foreigners who had seen what happened in Oboluafo, and they got the news out, and it was reported on Radio Cotonou and other radio stations. people received, they received signals in Nigeria, and folks in Kaduna heard about what happened in the southeast on Radio Cotonou, then decided to translate it into English and Hausa languages, broadcast it to their own people. They heard what happened to their brothers in the south, in the eastern part of Nigeria. Then they began to kill Ibos again. And that was massive, and it was a massacre. It was terrible. It was so bad that by the time the eastern region put out a document in October of 66, they claimed that 7,000 Ibos died. At the time, Ojukwu was the governor, so it wasn't like somebody else did it. Ojukwu said 7,000 people died in October of 1966, reporting what had happened, and all of the killings, of course. Nobody really talked about what happened to the Northerners, but he talked about what happened to the Easterners because, of course, that was his own, constituency. So he put out the message, and of course, people like Gowon felt very terrible about what happened. And so when they called for the adult conference, they expected to have representative from every part, including the eastern region, but they didn't really have anybody. But this is what Gowon said on 3rd October 1966. We're going to start from here today. It says, "Gentlemen, I will tell you this. Certainly, there has been a damage. I think that is what we never seem to admit when there is something like that. There's a damage, and I'm very, very sorry about it. I regret it, and I'm doing everything I can. As I said, for God's sake, don't lose hope. If we are alive and if we are determined, we can get this country back to its proper shape. I am determined to do that, even if it means my life. I give you my word for it. To our eastern friends, for God's sake, please don't lose hope. Let us try and see what we can do to mend what has happened. Give me a chance, and I am quite convinced I will be able to do something very shortly." That was October of 1966, and I just read Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria by H.M. Kirk Green. That was a speech by General Gowon. That was a speech by General Gowon. Well, while that was happening, there's also something that happened. Let me read that as well. Okay, that was October. Oh, I should say this. That was October. Well, something else had happened in September. September was when the adult conference was meant to start. Again, September 1966. The dates are very, very important. That tells you the mindset, I was going to say maniac mindset, to be honest, of certain people in this country. Now, people that kill them, terrible things that happen in the north and also in the east. By the way, folks in the north had apologized. The governor of the north apologized to the east for the people that died in the north. The federal government apologized to the east for the people that died in the north. The eastern government never apologized to anybody for all the northerners that were killed in the east. And there were many. I have a video on it on YouTube. I'm trying not to change today's topic because it's very, very emotional, the way they killed people. We hear about what happened to the Ibos, but we don't hear about what happened to others in the hands of the Ibos. And so we always have this single narrative, single story, perspective of the matter. We always say, somebody is a victim. Doesn't change the fact that Ibos were victims of what happened, though. It has to be acknowledged. But when you acknowledge only one side, what you're doing is to make that group the sole victim of the narrative, or in the narrative. So all the events that happened in Nigeria's history, that's the sole victim. That's a lie. They were perpetrators of terrible things in the Midwest, in the eastern region, even in parts of today's Middle Belt. Parts of Benue and Kogi State, the Ibos got there. Did terrible things. For the Northerners living in the, I've said this thing. I said it last time. I'm saying it again, but I've never read it. I've not read it so far. Do you mind if I read this thing? It's actually quite important. I'm trying to gloss over it, but I don't think it's going to help. You can't appreciate it until you've heard it. And again, like I always say, and it's important to repeat it, this is not to say some people are bad. It's just that you are not a saint. I'm not going to say you did something that you did not do just to be able to claim that, whatever. But it's important that we don't have this terrible thing where we just act like one group is, nothing happened to them. I won't even read everything. Should I read? Let's start with Enugu. Very quickly. In Enugu, the attack on Northerners started on the 15th of August. Igbo soldiers led the attack. About 630 Northerners were killed in the province, while 27 were seriously wounded. A northern boy, 7 years old, was publicly slaughtered in the street by uniformed I'll take that slowly. A northern boy, 7 years old, was publicly slaughtered in the street by uniformed Igbo soldiers in the presence of another northerner who dressed like an Igbo and was thus able to escape detection. In Onitsha province, 30 northerners were killed and 6 seriously injured. In Owerri too, where northerners had lived for long and intermarried with the Ibos, they were attacked and killed in cold blood, despite assurances from the Igbo elders. One northerner, by the Igbo elders in quote, one northerner who escaped from Owerri was Alhaji Sabo, who was born there, his father having settled there 70 years ago. His father, chief of the Hausa community in Owerri, had been a customary court judge there for 37 years. He was killed at the beginning of the organized attack on northerners in the presence of the son, who later managed to escape to Kaduna. All of that happened in August. In September, a very large number of those northerners who had managed to reach Oboloafo on their way to the north were murdered. This atrocity was witnessed by some foreigners on the Ojukwu-Onitsha road on their way to western Nigeria, and these eyewitnesses are believed to be one of the sources of information for the foreign broadcast of the atrocities. In Port Harcourt, a house with a large number of northern women in hiding was attacked. The women were raped and beaten to death. Ibos singing war songs slaughtered every northerner they could find in the street, and a number of those who were in hiding were killed quietly by their neighbors. During the evacuation, a train driven by an expatriate carrying about 2,000 northerners from Port Harcourt was stopped at Imo River by Igbo soldiers. Suddenly, Igbos armed with deadly weapons rushed out from the bush and attacked the passengers. Every adult male northerner on the train was killed and the body thrown into the river, while children and the young women were captured and taken into slavery. The few survivors were eventually admitted into Otukpo and Makodi hospitals. I'll just read only this part. If you read Sunset in Biafra, you will see what happened to others in Port Harcourt, the hands of Ibos. Again, you know what happened to Ibos in the north. It goes without saying, it was terrible. But you see, once you don't put things in proper perspective, you will be easily blackmailed with sub stories. Again, show compassion, but don't be naive, right? Something happened to people. In fact, let's just quickly go through it. Leaders of other people were killed by Ibos. Leaders, military leaders, political leaders in different parts of Nigeria, but not in Igbo land, but killed everybody. Those ones now retaliated in July. Bad, but it is what it is. They retaliated. Folks then went back to the east, so they killed a lot of Easterners, over 200. Well over 200 people were killed in July 29th into beginning of August. Those will go back home. They tell their own story. The people now caught Hausas or Northerners generally and started killing them. The news now traveled all the way back to the north, and then those ones began to kill Igbos as well. So you see, it's back and forth. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it easier for you to understand what really happens. So you don't go around, getting carried away by people who just want to run, an agenda, essentially. Anyway, while all that was happening, like I said, Gowon became head of state on August 1st. Second, he released our law. Later in August, was going to have a meeting. But here's what happened. Ojukwu, instead of sending a delegation from excuse me, I'm reading something on YouTube. Thank you very much for that comment. Instead of sending delegation to Lagos, he decided to send people to go bomb parts of Lagos, a particular place in Lagos, and also another place in Ore. This was not during the war. This was September of 66. We don't talk about it enough, but it's very, very important that we do. Towards the end of September 1966, Constitutional Conference, which Major General Gowon had set up, had made good progress. In fact, let me go back just a bit. On his assumption of office, Major General Gowon set in motion the machinery for finding a lasting solution to Nigeria's problems. He ordered A, the release of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who was leader of the opposition in the federal parliament until his imprisonment in 1963, Chief Anthony Nauru and other political prisoners and detainees. B, the immediate return to the federal system of government. C. The summoning of on 12 September 1966 of an ad hoc conference on constitutional proposals comprising representatives of all the regions of the Federation. This conference was preceded by consultative conferences in all areas in the regions. At these consultative conferences, the issue of the creation of more states in the Federation was revived, and memoranda were submitted demanding that the basic cause of dissatisfaction, i.e. the imbalance in the federal structure, should be removed. Please power tap on TikTok, thank you. Major General Gowon also announced that the country would return to civilian rule as soon as it could be arranged. The constitutional conference already referred to was preceded by terrorist bomb outrages in Lagos and at the Ore Bridge on the trunk road from Lagos to the east, organized by Ojukwu's administration. So way back in September 66, Ojukwu was bombing places in Ore and in Lagos. Where did he bomb in Lagos? It's called Federal Palace Hotel. That was the venue of the conference, and Ojukwu, instead of sending the people to come for the meeting, decided to just come and blow up the place. You know, just very retarded move, to be honest. Anyway, that happened, and several times they, made overtures to get him to attend these meetings. Even he, with the other military governors, he said no, he didn't attend. So what happened was that different conciliation committees went to Enugu, right? So there was a time when kings, Yoruba Obas, and chiefs went to talk to him, right, to try to persuade him. There was no war at this time. This was still 66. Just trying to tell him that, guy, you guys should have your meetings, talk about it. They couldn't really do much. And then, of course, much later, I'm trying to jump some things. Much later, you had the meeting with Awo and Marere. That was in May 6 and 7 of 67, so I don't want to go very far. Anyway, later on, the British High Commissioner, American ambassador, and so on and so forth, they tried to also persuade him. Eventually, they were able to get General Ankara in Ghana to hold a conference at Aburi, which is what this conversation is really about. So they went to Aburi, and when they got there, Ojukwu went there for business. And we said it the other time that, to be honest, as far as that event was concerned, Ojukwu was the best prepared person, right? It didn't bother with handshakes and with embraces. It only could just make do with handshakes and all that, according to Enyo Akman's book, The Struggle for Secession. So when they got there, they talked about what they were going to agree to, and then they came up with their stuff. I don't go back into all the details. Eventually, January 6 and 7, by the way, there's something I omitted. Ojukwu had published that 7,000 people died in in the north. 7,000 Igbo people died in the north. He said that October 1966. By January, when they went to Aburi, he said there were 10,000. Right? Much later in May, he said there were 30,000. By 1969, he said the number was 50,000. Not that more people were dying or just that particular event. And it's the kind of numbers I hear people throw around these days. 30,000 people died, 50,000 people died. Because they know you're not going to ask that question. You're just going to feel sorry because, that many numbers. That's why John de St. George said he played an irresponsible numbers game. He was just lying. Okay, it was terrible what happened, but I think it was worse with the lies. It was just unnecessary. Anyway, they went to Aburi, had the meeting, returned to Nigeria, and I'd like to go to Enyo Akpan's book. So we're in Aburi now, finally. Okay. Our introduction was not so long today, thank God. 1 second, please. All right, so they went for the meeting. They had, two books I'll be reading. The Struggle for Secession is the Eastern Angle from Enyo Akpan, and then Gowon, the Biography of a Soldier Statesman, is the Northern Angle from J. Isawa Elaigo. So, but they decided what they were going to do, and they agreed to what they were going to do in Aburi. All right, so they agreed to what they were going to do, talked about the fact that they're going to have an SMC instead of having a Supreme Commander. And I said it the other day that I think what Gowon actually considered was a lot, and he should be respected and celebrated for the things that he did. I think it was too generous, to be honest. And I think that actually affected everything, because when you want to do stuff, don't just do things because of God. You also have to understand what has happened. I wish Gowon had read Laws of Power before he did what he did, or at least he had advisors who were much older and who were not soldiers. Assuming that Nigeria was something, he should have talked to people who actually understood stuff. Anyway, what under the bridge? He considered a lot of stuff, and it was so bad that Ojukwu had to ask his guy, Enyu Akpan, why were those people so jubilant? Do you think they have grasped the full implications of the decisions they have taken? And Enyu Akpan says, I did not think they had, and I told the governor so. And he smiled with satisfaction and asked his ATC to bring out a bottle of champagne. I must have spoiled the fun and made him wonder. When in the midst of the drinking, I said, Your Excellency, I am honestly worried by it all. Anyway, the point is, by the way, we're reading Enyu Akpan's book because Enyu Akpan was the Secretary to the Government of the Eastern Region. So that happened. I'm trying to remember where we stopped though. So they returned to Nigeria, and Ojukwu was the first person to break the agreement. Why? As a matter of fact, they started breaking the agreement before the Aburi meeting itself. For instance, they were not supposed to go with any advice, as Ojukwu went with 9. Okay, and when they advised Gowon not to do it, since Ojukwu had already, scattered everything, Gowon said no, it's okay. They're going to have the meeting regardless. Anyway, they returned to Nigeria, and contrary to the agreement that Gowon should be the first person to announce what happened at Aburi, Ojukwu went ahead to announce everything, again tilting it in a different way. Let me read to you from Enyu Akpan. When they returned to Nigeria, right, he called the person like his mentor, said to him, but you have not brought us full independence on sovereignty. That was the reply that Ojukwu received. So in other words, before he went there, they wanted Nigeria to break, originally. And by the way, that's not the first time. They already planned to break Nigeria in 63 anyway, but let's continue here. The governor drove me to the State House accompanied by those who had come to receive him at the airport. We're just going to jump very quickly to... Good. Contrary to the understanding reached in Aburi, namely that the first statement on the outcome of Aburi should come from Lagos. Sorry, go back just a bit. Okay, it says, the governor was surprised and peeved that they said, but you have not brought us full independence. He was surprised and peeved. He drove home to the State House accompanied by those who had come to receive him at the airport. There, he briefed them fully on the decisions taken, after which he was probably advised to inform the public, contrary to the understanding reached in Aburi, namely that the first statement on the outcome of the Aburi should come from Lagos. Thus, soon after our arrival back home, the governor called a press conference because, quote-unquote, it has come to my notice that the public is anxious to have more details of decisions taken. And his hurry to make the statement was caused by the, quote-unquote, misgivings which I understand are prevalent in the region as a result of this meeting. He went on, I recall that, so he just went ahead to tell them everything, even if some of those things he was saying were just based on what he thought, the things were supposed to be. And then he went on to, release gramophone records and put things on radio. Their conversations, he put it out there. Everybody was supposed to know exactly what happened. So essentially, he had boxed Gowon in a corner. He also said that, they should, since they go back around 7th of January, they should have another meeting on the 14th of January. And he wanted to have the decree that would have everything in Aburi by the 21st of January. Okay, which was crazy because that was just like 2 weeks. Anyway, that didn't happen according to their plan, but they kept having meetings. So I'm just going to jump some pages. I don't want to go back to everything we discussed the other day. I'm just going to jump, but still in the book by Enyu Akpan, The Struggle for Secession. Okay, good. Although the law officers met as scheduled, the decree was not promulgated by January 21st, 1967. Before then, Colonel Ojukwu had been importuning the head of the military government to honor the deadline, but as we have seen, others were now having second thoughts. Why? Because of the way Ojukwu was also acting, okay? And also because by the time Gowon got back, we were like, wait, you have considered a lot already, like it's too much. Anyway, let's continue. But as we have seen, others were now having second thoughts. Later, a draft decree came from the federal government, but was clearly out of tune with the Aburi recommendations. The East naturally could not accept it. Tension heightened. Arguments and even quarrels broke out and worsened when on January 15th, the federal government launched a vicious pamphlet in answer to several which had been published by the East. The federal pamphlet was entitled Nigeria 66. Colonel Ojukwu claimed that in the true spirit of Aburi, Colonel Gowon had told him in advance about the publication and he had persuaded Colonel Gowon to agree to suspend it. In other words, Ojukwu had about a week of spreading propaganda, releasing records, publishing stuff. Gowon was going to, and without telling Gowon what he was doing, just rubbishing everybody. And then Gowon was going to respond, and even Gowon still reached out to Ojukwu and said, I'm going to send this thing out. Oh, I will not do that, by the way. Just saying. You're supposed to treat people the way they are, not the way you expect them to be. Because certain people, how do you say that in Yoruba, in English? If a person is used to sleeping on the floor, if you put them on the mat or on the bed, on the mattress, they will find a way to get back on the floor because that's what they're used to. All right, let's go on. On February 17th to 18th, I'm still reading in Akpan's book. Secretaries of the military government, accompanied by legal and financial advisors, met in Benin to advise on how the Aburi decisions should be implemented. They had up till now been pressures on the federal government by those who read the writing on the wall to do something about carrying out the Aburi decisions in order to keep the country together. At that meeting, I impressed upon my colleagues the need to implement the decisions in order to enhance the image and good name of the country. No matter what personal reservations one might have about the actual decisions, the fact remained they were agreements freely entered into by those in whose hands lay the destiny of the country. I criticized my colleagues in the federal government by trying to change policy decisions duly taken by the highest authority in the land, the Supreme Military Council. As civil servants, our duty was to carry out decisions of government, although we had also the right, indeed the duty, to analyze and spotlight the effects of such decisions. The outcome of that meeting was Decree number 8, which in my view faithfully implemented the Aburi decisions. Who is speaking here? NU Akpan. Who is NU Akpan? The secretary to the government of the Eastern region. He's saying here, in his view, that Decree number 8 faithfully implemented the Aburi decisions. If it faithfully implemented the Aburi decisions, how come nobody talks about Decree 8? They just shout Aburi, Aburi, Aburi all over the place. Let me read something to you from J. Sawelaigo. It was a moment of this. He was prepared to compromise everything but the experiment of Nigerians living apart and later on deciding whether it was possible to come back again. It was in this moment of tough decision making at Benin that one of the civil servants, the then Secretary of Western State Government, offered him advice Gowon would never forget. When things were really rough, that's Gowon speaking. Excuse me. Yemonites, thank you for writing the title of the book in the comment section. Thank you. So this is Gowon speaking. When things were really rough, I remembered him coming to say to me, "Sir, whatever it is, no matter how bad it may look, no matter how difficult the decision might be, if you have decided on that issue, approve it. Since you are sincere and the other side is not, they might do something which would then allow you to take further action. But no one would accuse you of going back on your words." I remember that very distinctly. It was Peter Odumosu who gave him that advice. So Gowon and his colleagues, excluding Ojukwu, approved the draft decree implementing Aburi. On 17th March 1967, it came into effect as Decree number 8, 1967. What's in this decree? According to this decree, Nigeria became more confederal than it had ever been. By its terms, a decree which was the sole prerogative of the federal military government could only come into effect with the consensus of all the military governors. Let me quickly say something. I don't think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it happened before Gowon and even after Gowon that the military head of state will require the governors to confer on a matter and vote on it before he makes a decision. I don't think that's how they did it. But that's what Gowon was trying to do. He was trying to do something. And we're going to get into the details of Decree number 8 today. We're going to get into it today. They're creating a situation where everybody, all the regions would have a say in the matter. So you don't have a supreme commander like Ironsi. Ironsi was supreme commander. You don't have a supreme commander. What you have is you have a head of state, but you have a supreme military council. All right, and based on what they came out with on March 17, it would have made Nigeria better than it was under civilian rule. Because the system we had under civilian rule was not even, the autonomy that this one would have given would have been more than what the regions had before Ironsi. But let's go on reading. So again, I'm reading Gowon, the biography of a soldier statesman by J. Isawa Elaigo. It says, according to this decree, that's decree 8, Nigeria became more confederate than it had ever been. By its terms, a decree which was the sole prerogative of the federal military government could only come into effect with the consensus of all the military governors. Both legislative and executive powers of the government of the federation were vested in the Supreme Military Council. So it was the parliament, it was the executive, they decided things together. The Federal Executive Council was to discharge only those functions which were specially delegated to it by the Supreme Military Council. So in other words, the cabinet will only do what the SMC says they should do. The SMC was a legislature, the SMC was an executive. Okay? So that means that all the governors of all regions, including Ojukwu, will be part of that SMC. So Gowon could not just decide what they wanted to do and say, I put out a decree, which is quite interesting. For the first time, the concurrence of the head of state and of all the regional governors was made essential with respect to certain matters in section 69B of the Constitution, i.e., trade, commerce, industry, transport, the armed forces, the Nigerian police, and higher education. The above provisions made the federal government highly dependent on regional governments. The federal government's action on any of the listed items could easily have been paralyzed by the objection of any two of the regional governors. This was basically a confederal arrangement in which the general government is dependent upon the regional government. What's it saying here? 1967, at least at this point in March, we had 4 regional governments: Northern, Eastern, Western, Midwestern. We had 4. And then you had the head of state. So in order to do anything that has to do with transport, armed forces, Nigerian police, trade, commerce, higher education, in order to do anything that has to do with all those things, they're going to have to vote. And if 2 of the regional governors say no, that means that that particular thing will not sail through. In other words, the federal military government is dependent on the regional government in order to make decisions. That's quite cool, isn't it? I'm not sure I like it, but it would have been really cool. So what that means basically is, even by the time you transition, you go back to civilian government, you see that situation where the regions still have a lot of autonomy, and you couldn't just tell them what to do because you're Oga in the federal government. So the center will be a bit weaker. Essentially, it will be weaker than Ironsi. Any sane person would jump at this. Let's continue. Given the circumstances at the time, let's go on. The federal government's action on any of the listed items could easily have been paralyzed by the objection of any 2 of the regional governors. So if Ojukwu says no, and let's say David Ejo says no, that means nothing's going to happen. You get the point? If Hassan, the governor, did not say no, like any 2 of them could just say no, that means that thing's not going to sail through. That still gives you power, right? Your chief justice, everything in your state, you will appoint that one yourself. When it comes to Supreme Court, the head of state will not be the only one to appoint the Supreme Court judges. It will still need you to appoint them. So what you are saying basically is that without you, not much can be done, even though you are the governor. You know, if we had this, nobody will be shouting, I want to break Nigeria. But the person who won't break Nigeria before still not like this kind of thing, because you get waiting you won't do for your own mind. So I'm going to read that again. I'm trying to get into the details of Decree 8. We just said Decree 8. What is it? What is in Decree 8? What's it about? And why do we say it makes sense? Let's continue reading. Ade said on TikTok, some people will vote against coastal road in that type of arrangement. Yes. See, what it means basically is that you have to make your case. This is why we need to do this now. This is why we need to do that. Me, like I said, I don't like it. I like a federal system. I don't like confederal system. A federal system makes sense. I'm not even trying to, don't come and decide anything. But again, when it comes to that kind of coastal road, if you want to do it in your own region, you can do it. It's just that when it has to be a national thing, you have to now decide on that matter. But actually, infrastructure like that did not come under this kind of thing, by the way. So it's not like, I mean, I thank God I remember, they don't have to vote on things like this. When it comes to infrastructure, the federal government can do it without having to vote on it. It's not every decision that the federal government wants to make that requires voting. I already read the specific things: armed forces, the army, Nigerian police, higher education, like federal universities, industry, transport, not infrastructure. So things like that, they would not have needed anybody to vote. But even then, where you need to vote, all you have to do is to make your case. But I think the real thing is the fact that the head of state would not have had as much power as is expected to have in a military arrangement. You get the point? So I think that for me is actually quite, like, it's very gracious. I mean, it's the head of state being very, very gracious. Still being very, very gracious. So what would have had is, and it makes sense. So if you really think about it, don't worry. Let me not preempt. We'll get into what makes it better. Let's get back into this. Okay, we're good now. So it says here, moreover, each regional military governor was to appoint the judges of the High Court of his region, while those of the Supreme Court were to be appointed by the Supreme Military Council. Most of the powers given to the head of the federal military government by Decree number 1 of 1966 became, please pay attention. Most of the powers given to the head of the federal military government by Decree number 1 of 1966 became vested not in the head of state Gowon, but in the Supreme Military Council, in which regional military governors now had veto powers. Whereas under the above decree, the SMC was only to advise the head of the federal military government. Now he's had most of the powers, and the head of state was a mere chairman. Ironsi gave us decree number 1 that centralized power not just in government but in himself. He had an SMC, but they only advised him, and he could decide not to work with them or work with their advice. Gowon gave us a decree that takes the power away from him and has that power given to the Supreme Military Council, who they're not just going to be there to advise him, but they have veto power. Ojukwu said no. We'll read more. So I just mean the chairman of, what I just remember right now? Anybody? What I just remember right now? I just remembered Ile-Ife before Ojukwu. They had the Confederacy as well. Quite interesting. History is, this life is a cycle, isn't it? Let's go on. All appointments to super scale group and above in federal public service and posts of deputy commissioners of police and above in the Nigerian police force were to be made by the Supreme Military Council. The Supreme Military Council was also to make appointments of ambassadors and high commissioners as well as principal representatives to other countries. Okay? Remember, there was no parliament. There is no National Assembly. So those 5 people, the governors of the 4 regions and the head of state, they are the National Assembly, they are the presidency, they are everything. So you know how when we're going to have, this last round of ambassadors list that was sent to the National Assembly from the president to the National Assembly, where it would be from them, to those 5 people to decide who will be the diplomat, the ambassador to the United States, will be this people. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of power. The Supreme Military Council was also to make appointments of ambassadors and high commissioners as well as principal representatives to other countries. Certainly, if Nigeria was still a federation under this decree, it must have been a very weak federation. It was virtually a confederate system, or a confederate structure, which went very far to meet the demands of Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, even if it did not mean the implementation of Aburi in absolute terms. Ojukwu got from this decree what he had failed to get at the ad hoc constitutional conference. As Ojukwu's chief secretary admitted, the decree number 8, quote, in my view, faithfully implemented the Aburi decisions, end of quote. We read that from his book, The Struggle for Secession by N.U. Akpan. It was therefore an understatement when, in reference to this decree, Lieutenant Colonel Gowon said, the said decree number 8 in effect restored the powers of the regional governments to the constitutional position before January 17, 1966. He was more correct when he told the listening diplomats. This is what he said originally was that, okay, we're going to go back to what we were before January 17, 1966. But in actual fact, what he was giving was better than what Iransi met there. So this is what he told the diplomats. In fact, the decree went further. This is Gowon speaking. The decree went further than mere restoration and for the first time included regional governors as members of the federal executive. Thus, you will see that the position of regional government has actually been considerably strengthened. This decree also established area command in the effort to re-establish confidence within the army and maintain discipline in order to ensure the continuation of the Nigerian army under a unified command. In other words, you still have area command of the army. And you that are the governor of that region, you can still direct what's going to happen to those people. Oh, okay, let's go on. Let me go back to what Gowon said. In fact, the decree went further than mere restoration and for the first time included regional governors as members of the federal executive. Thus, you will see that the position of regional governments has actually been considerably strengthened. This decree also established area command in the effort to re-establish confidence within the army and maintain discipline in order to ensure the continuation of the Nigerian army under unified command. It was in consonance with this spirit that the title of the high office, which I have the honor to hold, was changed from the Supreme Commander to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The central government of Nigeria became far weaker than the regions. The provision that decrees could only be issued with consensus of all military governors, while the military governors continued to make edicts in their regions with a high degree of autonomy, meant greater weakness of the central government in its relationship with the regions. What is he saying here? What he's saying basically is this: you are the governor of the East. You can create edicts in your region. You have autonomy. But even at the central level, we can make certain decrees, major decrees, without your input. So which means that you can do things without the government, without the federal government, but the federal government cannot do things without you, for the most part. Someone in the comment section says, worse democracy is still better than the best dictatorship. But this is not a dictatorship, that's the point. This wasn't going to be a dictatorship. A dictator will not do. Have you ever seen any dictator in this world? If you know anyone, please let me know. A dictator who has a confederal system, who grants autonomy to the regions. That's why I said this man did not behave like a military man when he was conceding all these things. I don't know any military man that would do that. I don't think Nigeria actually appreciates him enough. Maybe we don't know what he did. Oh, thank you very much on YouTube. Thank you. Let's go on. The central government of Nigeria became far weaker than the regions. The provision that decrees could only be issued with the consensus of all military governors, while the military governors continued to make edicts in their regions with a high degree of autonomy, meant greater weakness of the central government in its relationship with the regions. Though Gowon had in his 30 November 1966 broadcast rejected confederalism by the terms of the decree, confederalism could not have been more fully accepted. Excuse me. Hence, edicts were made in the eastern region for the takeover of federal government corporations, such as the airways, railways, shipping, ports, telecommunications, electricity, and coal corporations. That's what Ojukwu did. As Gowon had occasion to complain, there is no doubt that these so-called edicts are contrary to the laws and constitution of Nigeria. Consequently, they have no validity. In other words, you can't just take over everything that the government has in your region because you have greater powers. I don't know how to explain this thing. It's just, no, I know how to explain this thing. I know, actually, no, I'm trying to find a way to break it down. I know what to say. So here's the thing. Ojukwu was about power, not about cooperation. He didn't care about cooperating with anybody. What he was doing was to take over everything that the federal government had done in his region and say, now it belongs to me and I'm the Oga of this place. I don't care what you are doing in Lagos. If an Igbo man studies what I'm saying right now, listens to me very closely, this might actually heal your entire life. I mean, your generation might heal you. Imagine for a second Ojukwu said yes to this. Because everybody else said yes. The North said yes. The West said yes. The Midwest said yes. Only the East said no. Let's read a few more things. It's just sad. Then he goes around shouting, on Aburi we stand. Aburi that has 3 legs, but two don't break. Now only one. You could just fall, your teeth go come out. Where were we? So Eastern region was making edicts for the takeover of the federal government corporations. The thing where federal government get for your region, you can't take and say now you own them. Maybe you build them all, but say now you own them because you get power. But whereas to go on, the edicts in the East had no validity to Ojukwu. They were very valid. Ojukwu had rejected decree number 8. The centrifugal pull had gone to the extent that federal authority was no longer binding on the Eastern region in practical terms. If the decree was politically expedient for short-term purposes, it was politically myopic for long-term purposes. If only Ojukwu had accepted the decree and made political capital out of it, Nigeria would have been at the very best by now a de facto confederal country, short of secession. With the benefit of hindsight, Nigeria was probably lucky that Ojukwu rejected the decree despite its embedded advantages for him. If Ojukwu had accepted that decree, Nigeria would have been a de facto confederal country at the very best. The only difference between what Ojukwu wanted and what Gowon gave was secession. Guys, that was the only thing Gowon did not give. I don't know any sane person, a military person, for instance. Number one, I don't even know any normal military guy that would do confederation like Gowon. So he's even in a class of his own. But I don't know anyone that will say, okay, now that I'm the head of state, to come and break this country and go your separate ways because I want to give you everything you want. So the only thing that Ojukwu did not get from the agreement, the only thing, I'm going to see when we get to the United States cables on this matter, I have them here. The only thing that I didn't get was secession. It says here, with the benefit of hindsight, Nigeria was probably lucky that Ojukwu rejected the decree despite its embedded advantages for him. It is not clear why Ojukwu rejected this decree. His chief secretary, who had been involved in the drafting of this decree and was in a position to have had first-hand knowledge of what was going on, claimed that Ojukwu and his young Igbo lawyers who had much influence over him had made up their minds not to accept the decree. It's in this book, The Struggle for Secession. We'll read this when we get there, but we're already reading it here anyway, so let's go on. He claimed that the Igbo lawyers who had been actively involved in the drafting of the decree at Benin returned to Enugu only to recommend its rejection by Ojukwu. Akpan's recommendation as the chief secretary that the draft decree number 8 had given the Eastern region most of its demands and therefore should be accepted was rejected by Ojukwu. Let me read something to you from Akpan for a second. Why are people wicked? Why? You will hurt your people and the coming generations, then you lie to them that somebody else did it. And while you are alive, they'll be cursing that person and you'll be happy. And now that you are dead, they are still cursing those people, not knowing that you are the one who actually destroyed their lives. If Ojukwu had accepted this in 66, 67, there will be no Nnamdi Kanu and IPOB. Guys, lesson for all of us. May God give us wisdom and understanding. When you are doing things, please remember tomorrow. It's not about ego. This is a shame. This is painful. You know, I said there's something you read in Nigeria, you just be angry. Just be angry, like, who does this? GDX will say, wait, it does this, but you get the point. Like, who does this? Let me read to you what the Chief Secretary said. That's Enyapan. He says the draft decree had gone to the governor first, and he had handed it to the legal experts, in quote, to examine. I saw a copy later, but in time for me to study and make counter comments on the legal experts' comments. In other words, the legal experts made a comment on the decree, on the draft decree. He is now making his own comment on the comments of the legal experts. So he says here, I saw a copy later, but in time for me to study and make counter comments on the legal experts' comments, a copy of which had been sent to me. I do not have a copy of the legal experts' comments with me, but my own counter remarks may give an idea what they said, which eventually led to the rejection of that decree by the Eastern Nigerian military government. So we're trying to answer the question that J. Sawelago asked in his book. So he's writing this to Ojukwu. He says, Your Excellency, Lagos has now submitted a draft decree for the implementation of the Aburi Agreement. It is now for Your Excellency to decide, taking all the implications into account, whether to concur with the publication of the decree or not. In order for this to be done objectively, I suggest the draft decree be studied against the background of the Aburi decisions. Those decisions broadly involve the following. Number one, the restoration of the powers of the regional governments which had been suppressed or depressed by Decree Number 1 following the army takeover in 1966. Number two, the vesting in the Supreme Military Council all the powers which used to belong to the federal government prior to January 16th, with the proviso that any decision of the Supreme Military Council which affected the whole country must receive the concurrence of the military governors. In other words, insofar as those matters were concerned, the military governors had the powers of veto. We already explained all of those things. When it came to the powers of the government, it wasn't just the head of state being a dictator, it was the SMC deciding what Nigeria had to do per time as far as decrees were concerned. So that meant that you had a lot of power as a governor, even though you're not the head of state. The head of state is just the chairman of your committee, like Oranfe or Batala. Number three, the vesting in the Supreme Military Council of all powers of appointment into certain categories of posts in the federal public service, namely A, diplomatic and consular posts, B, senior posts in the armed forces, C, senior posts in the police, D, super scale posts in the federal civil service, E, super scale posts in the federal corporations. In other words, if you want to make somebody permanent secretary, a federal kini or director, the head of state cannot just make that decision. You have to make it together. Number four, apart from restriction of powers, the vesting of all the powers in the Supreme Military Council, power to appoint those people we mentioned earlier. Number four, the reorganization of the army. Number five, the resettlement of displaced persons. Now it goes on. The power to make the appointments at A, C, and D imply that the Federal Public Service Commission and the Police Service Commission were reduced to advisory capacities. Insofar as these appointments were concerned, at the moment they have executive powers in respect of these appointments. What is he saying here? He's saying here that up until this moment, the Police Service Commission and Federal Public Service Commission are the ones that decide what happens as far as appointments and promotions were concerned. But it's saying now that based on what this decree that they're just bringing out, this decree number 8, it'd be like, say, Police Service Commission cannot just appoint IG. They can only advise the SMC, the Supreme Military Council, on who to appoint as Inspector General of Police. In other words, the Police Service Commission has moved from the executive role to advisory role. So the executive powers, 100%, ONO SMC, resides now in the SMC. The same thing for the Federal Public Service Commission. When it comes to appointing Director General or something, the Federal Public Service Commission will not just be able to do that anymore. It now has to be the decision of the SMC. So we can start saying things like, we don't want that kind of person to become Director General of choose any parastatal. And the Federal Public Service Commission cannot decide anymore. They can only advise the SMC on who to put there. You see how powerful that SMC was? You have to be a demon or you are specially possessed to reject this thing alone, considering the fact that it was military. If they give you Nigeria today, if they give you this kind of decree, this kind of law today, would you not jump at it? Let's go on. It says the power to make the appointments imply that the Federal Public Service Commission and the Police Service Commission were reduced to advisory capacities insofar as these appointments were concerned. At the moment, they have executive powers in respect of these appointments. Number 3, for the purpose of the present decree, the following decisions of Aburi meeting are not relevant. A. Appointment to superscale posts in the federal corporations. This will require the amendment of the different laws which establish these corporations. B. The reorganization of the army. This must depend on whether recommendations the military experts. This must depend on whatever recommendations the military experts who were to meet will make, leading to the amendment of the Army Act as will be decided by the Supreme Military Council. Number C. The resettlement of displaced persons. This will involve the whole question of fiscal arrangements or formula for the allocation of revenue which were to be determined by the financial experts or the various governments. Number 4, having said this, it is for us to see whether those decisions which can be implemented by the present draft decree have in fact been implemented. He's saying here that the first part of these things, this decree has already implemented it. The other part that has to do with appointment and everything is something that folks will have to sit on and decide. So for instance, not to reorganize the army has to sit on it, and then they will send recommendations to the SMC. In other words, what he's saying basically is that all these things that are not taken care of right now are the things that this decree creates a framework for, right? And so it says, having said all the things I've said, though, it is for us to decide whether those decisions which can be implemented by the present draft decree have in fact been implemented. Please pay attention. It may sound a bit, a lot of Turenchi, but please pay attention. This is Nigerian history. We ready? Good. My close study of the draft decree with the eyes of a layman, as carefully compared with the Aburi decisions, show that they have in fact been implemented. The Chief Secretary of the Eastern Region is saying that when he compared the draft decree number 8 with the Aburi recommendations, he says everything has been implemented. The position and powers which had been detracted from the regions by decree number 1, which Ironsi brought, by the way, it wasn't even Gowon that brought decree number 1. It was the same Ironsi, and Ojukwu wasn't on it. He wasn't on it. We'll talk about that some other time. Ojukwu was in on it. Gowon didn't even make these decrees without Ojukwu. How about that? The decree that abolished regional, I'm leaving the topic for a second. The decree that abolished regional system in this country that Gowon pushed was not done without Ojukwu. I'm saying before it was promulgated, Ojukwu was part of the whole show. Read the book by Nebo Graham Douglas. Early May 66, Ojukwu was asking Nebo Graham Douglas to draft a decree, a unity decree for Nigeria. Why did he talk to him? Because he was his Attorney General and he was against the idea. It's in his book. That book was published in 1968, Ojukwu's Rebellion and World Opinion. You'll find it for free on our Telegram channel, Radio Me Global. He was asking him to draft the decree for unitary system. By May 24, that decree was promulgated. All the rubbish thing that Ironsi did, Gowon did not do it. Gowon is reversing it. You are still saying no, but you're part of the people that even destroyed it in the first place. Somebody says on TikTok, those whom God want to, it says those whom the gods want to destroy, he first makes mad. Ojukwu was made mad. I guess so. Thank you, MD on YouTube, and thank you, Mr. Bankole Gani. Thanks a lot. This thing is painful. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. You study some things, you're just angry. Some people are just possessed with demons. It has to be legion, to be honest. I'll come back to this book. Let's finish this one. So NU Akpan is saying here, my close study of the draft decree with the eyes of a layman, as carefully compared with the Aburi decisions, show that they have in fact been implemented. The position and powers which had been detracted from the regions by decree number 1 have been restored. Executive and legislative powers of the federal government have been vested in the Supreme Military Council with the proviso as stipulated at Aburi. What is it saying here? I said it before, I will say it again. He's saying that the executive arm of government, we have three arms, Abi: executive, legislature, and judiciary. The executive arm of government and the legislative arm of government have been combined in the SMC. So, Governor Ojukwu, you are part of the executive arm of the government. You are also part of the legislative arm of the government. In other words, you make the laws for this country, even though you are the governor of a region. You are legislature. You are part of the legislature. And you decide what has to happen in certain cases, which means you are part of the executive. The president, the head of state, cannot just decide. You have to agree or not. If you say I don't agree and you get another person to say you don't agree, that thing is not done. Think about it for a second. You are the governor. Has that ever happened in Nigerian history? You're a governor. You're not going to meet your guy. You have 4 governors. You're talking to your head of state. You now say, I want to do something. 2 of you now say, we know they do. Governor, head of state now say, okay. Since 2 of you are not doing, okay. That's not how it works in the military. But that's what Gowon was willing to concede. I mean, not just willing, he actually conceded. Let's go on. It says here, executive and legislative powers of the federal government have been vested in the Supreme Military Council with the proviso as stipulated at Aburi. Appointments to diplomatic and consular posts, senior posts in the police, and super scale posts in the federal civil service have also been vested in the Supreme Military Council. Number 5, I have this morning received a copy of the comments by the lawyers. In considering the comments of the lawyers, I submit that Your Excellency be guided by the following considerations. A. The fact that this draft decree, please pay attention. Anybody that shouts Aburi on Aburi will stand, God will judge you. And the dead amongst you and the living, God will judge all of you. Listen to this. The fact that this draft decree, presents a major victory for Your Excellency's stand and principles. I assess the success to be at least 95%. I'm not making it up. That's what you wrote. Your chief secretary is saying, I assess this decree, the success of this decree to be at least 95%. I mean, in other words, the success of what we wanted in Aburi, we have gotten that success in this decree, at least, not at most, at least 95%. You have to be possessed by demons to say no to this. But we're going to come back to this. I want to read another book very quickly. We're coming back to The Struggle for Secession by N.U. Akpan soon. I want to read you something from Hilary M. Joku. God. It's only God that can have mercy on this nation. And I think what actually pains me the most really is that the ones who have destroyed this country are the ones who cry the most. Shout, hey, Aburi, we stand. You will fall down. I want to read something from A Tragedy Without Heroes by Hilary M. Njoku. N.U. Akpan said that the draft decree gave them at least 95%. Right? Well, Hilary Njoku decided, it wasn't even the one that decided it. He reported another person making a statement on the fact that no, 95% was too low. He gave them even more than that, according to that particular person. Just give me a second. I'll find you that page. It's very important, so it might take us. If it takes me a while, please try and understand. I'm only doing this because it's important. I found it. Page 118. A Tragedy Without Heroes by Hilary M. Njoku. Please pay attention. One morning, about 10th March 1967, I got to the governor's office at the State House. There were smiles on every face. Mr. N.U. Akpan, the secretary to the military government, was the first person of note I met. That's the man who wrote the book we just read, that said at least 95% of what they wanted in Aburi was implemented in Decree number 8. So he said here, this is Ilarin Joku. By the way, Ilarin Joku was the commander of Biafra's army, the very first one. So these are not just anybody. These are like main people in the government. I got to the governor's office at the State House. There were smiles on every face. Mr. N.U. Akpan, the secretary to the military government, was the first person of note I met. He greeted me with the expression, "Shake my hand, we have made it, we have made it." I asked, "What?" "Gowon has issued the right decree on Aburi," he replied. I later walked across to the office of the governor's private secretary, Mr. Don Egbe. He confirmed the news. He added that as a legal lawyer, he observed that the new decree number 8, contained 98% of the Aburi decisions, and that the remaining 2% was military jargon that could not fit into legal terms. Do you hear that? 98%. If you send Peking go school, Peking get 60%, you know, try. 70, of course, you're my son, like you have done well. 80, oh boy, we're going to go and get you something. 90, case finished. 90, 80, cuckoo, take the house. Like, the point is, if you send a child to school and you got this kind of grade, you'll be happy as a parent, but not Ojukwu. Because it's not about joy or happiness, it's about ego and ambition built on stupidity. Because how on earth would you go against this? Let's go on. In fact, I'm going to read everything again. One morning, about 10th March 1967, I got to the governor's office at the State House. There were smiles on every face. Mr. N.U. Akpan, the secretary to the military government, was the first person of note I met. He greeted me with the expression, "Shake my hand, we have made it, we have made it." I asked, "What?" "Gowon has issued the right decree on Aburi," he replied. I later walked across to the office of the governor's private secretary, Mr. Don Egbe. He confirmed the news. He added that as a legal man, he observed that, quote unquote, the new decree number 8, contained 98% of the Aburi decisions, and that the remaining 2% was military jargon that could not fit into legal terms. We congratulated each other. As soon as the military governor entered his office, I followed him in a much more relaxed mood. "Congratulations, Your Excellency. I understand that the new decree on Aburi is out and embodies all you've been asking for. Who told you?" No, I won't accept it. It is too late." Too late. Wait, back up. You were in Aburi 4th and 5th of January 1967. You go back to Nigeria around the 7th. You had a meeting on January 14th. You said you want a decree on 21st as though you are the Oga of everybody, which makes no sense. People have to sit on it. By February, there was a meeting of all the secretaries of the government, of all the governments, of the regional governments. March 10, just about 2 months after your meeting in Ghana, you have a decree and you're saying it is too late. Too late for what exactly? "Congratulations, Your Excellency. I understand that the new decree on Aburi is out and embodies all you've been asking for. Who told you?" No, I won't accept it. It is too late." My face dropped and I was short of words. Indeed, Gowon had delayed in issuing the correct decree on the decision of Aburi. Then it is also a fact that the advice of the Committee of the Federal Permanent Secretaries and Executive Council might have played a part both in the delay and the shortcomings of the decree. Aburi decisions reduced Nigeria to a confederation, and what is worse, it created regional armies in the name of area commands. Regional armies. So you are the governor of the region, but you have an area command. In other words, you have Agbara, you have power over the army in your region. What else do you want if you're a human being? Thank you, Howdy, on YouTube. Thank you for the gift. God bless you. Howdy says maybe we should put across to our rep. Maybe we should put it across to our reps in the House of Senate. Sorry, I'll take that again. Maybe we should put it across to our reps in the House and Senate to support creation of Biafra. I think we should. But I want them to even do it. Yorùbá sọ pé ọmọ tó bá ṣípá nìyẹn ń gbé. I want them to ṣípá so we can support them. You know, when I talk, you almost think that and they say it, you hate us, you hate us. You don't even get it. I love you to the point that I wish you knew where your problem was. And as Nigerians, I wish we also knew what was up, because if we knew, nobody would be blackmailing us with nonsense. I'm saying you hate me, you hate me. If you think I hate you, that's your business. Who does this? Regional army. Say now we're saying that, oh, army is under the federal government. No, this one allows you as a governor to command your own army, even though you are, because of course you're part of the SMC. The next time I hear you on Aburi will stand, I'll tell the person, God will judge you, because this is, at this moment, God has to judge these people. You can't be telling us, they be blackmailing and manipulating, writing, gaslighting you with Aburi will stand, Aburi will stand. What's an Aburi? What's an Aburi? What's an Aburi? Let's go back to this. I'm hissing because it's just irritating. And this is what Ojukwu says. It would have been unbecoming of an officer and gentleman if Gowon had rejected the Aburi Accord completely. But he did not. For Ojukwu, history will fault him for this strategic mistake. That is, rejecting the decree on Aburi, no matter how late and relatively incomplete. Perhaps he had bargained for more. 98%. Essentially 100%. Because they said the remaining 2% are just military jargon. It's not saying that the 2% doesn't allow, to give it's just saying that no, like, it's just military jargon. We got everything we wanted. Now let's go back to the book by N.U. Akpan. And please remind me, if I forget, we're going to go to America. We're going to read American stuff today as we round up, because back to N.U. Akpan's book, The Struggle for Secession. The fact that this draft decree presents a major victory for Your Excellency's stand and principles, I assess the success to be at least 95%. B. The federal government has made this capitulation mainly because the whole world, through their accredited representatives, have brought pressure to bear on them in support of Your Excellency's moral stand. The feelings and reactions of these countries through their diplomats should not be ignored if something happened to show that their efforts have been in vain. In other words, they've been pressuring the government of Nigeria. Now that they have given you this thing, take it so it doesn't look like all the work that America and Britain and all these countries did was just for nothing. C. Unless the departures in the draft decree have been very fundamental, it is advisable that we ignore them so as to avoid giving the impression that we do not want a settlement. This is your secretary for this thing where they don't give you. More just take them, because if you don't take them, go be like say we don't want a settlement. D. Your Excellency's policy and public statements show that you are striving for a peaceful and Your Excellency's policy and public statements show that you are striving for a peaceful and just settlement of our difficulties through negotiation. The outright rejection of this draft decree will dash every hope of a peaceful settlement and avoidance of a violent conflict. This was in March. 2 months later, Ojukwu is declaring Biafra. I think N.U. Akpan is like this because he's not Igbo. With all due apologies, with all due respect, because he's not Igbo. I don't know. Boyo Mini. Maybe it's the water that people drink. Number 6. I will now make brief comments on the points raised by the lawyers. Reading them through, I see that they involve technicalities. I agree that decrees promulgated by the Supreme Military Council should be signed by the chairman of that council, but the chairman has not yet been elected. And to insist on this issue, please, God, please, I'm sorry with all this, oh God, is because I'm using that to actually stop myself from saying certain things. So please bear with me. Listen to this. This is one of the reasons his own lawyer said he should reject the decree. that was not signed by the chairman. Chairman, where you say you no agree, say that person be chairman until you have your next meeting. Say the head of state, you cannot agree that the head of state Gowon is your chairman until you have the next SMC, and that's when you're going to appoint or agree with him being chairman. So he hasn't signed yet. You're not using that as a basis for not agreeing. It's a draft decree. They have not promulgated it yet, though. Let's read. I agree that decrees promulgated by the Supreme Military Council should be signed by the chairman of that council, but the chairman has not yet been elected. And to insist on this issue for this particular decree presupposes that the Supreme Military Council must meet and elect the chairman so that he might sign the decree. This will be contrary to the stand of this government, that there can be no question of your excellencies attending a meeting of the Supreme Military Council before this decree is promulgated. In other words, you said that you're not going to attend any meeting until the decree is promulgated. They are showing the draft of the decree. You now said you cannot agree to the draft because there is no signature. Because you have also said there will be no signature until you appoint somebody at your next meeting. In other words, it's like chicken and egg. Let me say it slowly. Number one, they said this is the head of state and chairman of the SMC. You say no, I will not agree. I will not agree. It's Gowon. I will not agree. Then they say, okay, so what are we going to do? When we have the next meeting, we're going to appoint him as the chairman, right? Okay, good. Okay, this is the draft decree. It's not signed by the chairman. It can't be signed by the chairman because we have not met yet. But I'm not going to go. Well, you said that until this decree is promulgated, you will not go for any meeting of the SMC. So that means that if you were thinking properly, sir, you would need to sign in where you then appoint the chairman who can now sign all the papers you want in your life. These are the people that are leading some people, Abi. Leading. This is sad. Buru. Let me just be hissing like this because it's better for me to hiss than to say what I want to say or what I would have loved to say, because I can go Aburi and Aburi. Do Ibos know this thing? Do they know these things? Because there's no way any group will know this thing and will see we're doing hip-hop all over the place. Shouting on Aburi, we stand. You went to school, you have degrees, and you're fighting on something that was already taken care of. If you knew what Ojukwu did, you would probably exhume him. You know that thing happened in Rome. They exhumed the Pope. He was dead though. They brought him up to answer for his crimes. And when they I don't know how he was supposed to answer, but then he was found guilty. They now sentenced him in death. By the way, when he was answering for his crime, they exhumed him. They made him sit down, skeleton. Power is skinny. Like, history is something else. There is a way government works. Not all this Nigeria, no retreat, no surrender, no victor, no vanquished. We are all good people, great nation. This is just nonsense. There's no structure. There's no order. This one, they exhumed the dead, put him on a chair to answer for his crime, found him guilty, sentenced him to whatever kidney was supposed to go to, just to deal with that thing he did. I'm not saying you should do it for some people, but you get the point. If you have to do it, you have precedence. Let's go back to the book. Yeah, because I'm smiling because I don't want to lose. I mean, it's just painful. Be there, be praying for Nigeria to change. Nigeria should change. You know, I don't value in there. Okay, for area for lower. Where was I? Let's start the signature thing again. So he says, I will now make brief comments on the points raised by the lawyers. These were the young lawyers that Isao Eligo was referring to in the other book. He says, I will now make brief comments on the points raised by the lawyers. Reading them through, I see that they involved technicalities. I agree that decrees promulgated by the Supreme Military Council should be signed by the chairman of that council. But the chairman has not yet been elected. And to insist on this issue for this particular decree presupposes that the Supreme Military Council must meet and elect the chairman so that he might sign the decree. This will be contrary to the stand of this government that there can be no question of Your Excellencies attending a meeting of the Supreme Military Council before this decree is promulgated. In any case, the Aburi decision spoke of the chairman of the Supreme Military Council, head of the Federal Military Government, and commander-in-chief as being one and the same person. The question of which of these three designations he should use in signing the decree is a matter of detail. Like, it doesn't matter. For the present decree number 7, perhaps we could ask that it be promulgated by the Secretary of the Federal Military Government by the order of the Supreme Military Council. If the Federal Military Government should be difficult over this issue, then let it be signed by whoever wishes to sign it, provided the Supreme Military Council will take the earliest opportunity to ratify such a signature. In other words, if signature is your problem in life, let anybody in Nigeria sign this thing, and then you guys, SMC, can now say that, okay, we are going to ratify it later. How on earth are you going to hold everybody to ransom because you want a signature that cannot get there based on what you think who you think should be the chairman? Even though in Aburi we all agree that 3 posts are occupied by one person. What are 3 posts? Number 1, the chairman of the Supreme Military Council, the head of the Federal Military Government, and the commander-in-chief. These 3 posts, now only one person now go on. So why are you going all over the place about this? Adekunle Rotimi says, is it safe then to suggest that NU Akpan was not fully privy to the inner workings of the Ojukwu government at the time he reviewed the draft decree? Of course it was privy. Maybe you were not here when we started. The draft decree was sent to Ojukwu. He gave the decree to the lawyers. The lawyers reviewed the decree. He then got the draft decree and the reviews of the lawyers. He is making his own comment on the lawyers' comments. That means it's literally part of the inner workings. I mean, what do you mean? It's part of it now. It's privy to the inner workings. He's making recommendations based on the recommendations of the lawyers. How inner do you get? They were now doing Law 101. Who should sign? Who should not sign? In fact, if you have the opportunity, because this thing is long, right? If I want to read every single thing that he made comment on, it's just sad. It's just sad. For instance, you know what? Section 6(4). I do not honestly follow the lawyer's comments here. The examples given reflect the advice of the officials in Benin, but my discussion of this section with the economic advisor shows that the wording of the draft decree enumerating the subject covers the case. I do not think that it would be very realistic to insist on the inclusion of the words quote-unquote administer all the existing laws, since in fact the Supreme Military Council does not and cannot administer existing laws, which is a matter for the courts and the executive officials of the government. Like Parliament, they make laws for others to administer. In other words, they were looking for things that had no bearing. You know when you get everything, if you want to know the 2% that they're looking for, or the 1%, buy the book, The Struggle for Secession by NU Akpan. You will cry for this country. Let me read one of those things to you in Schedule 1. It says, as a layman, I saw in the revival of this section the means to tie the hands of the federal military government by ensuring that the concurrence of all the military governors is secured before anything affecting the whole country is done, as recommended by the officials in Benin. Section 69, subsection 6 appears to have done this. Then it says, can we really reject the draft on this score? I think if we make the point, people in Lagos will not resist. After all, they have lost much more worthwhile powers. This is his secretary. See, these people in Lagos, they've already lost a lot of powers anyway. So if you tell them that you want to, they've lost all the powers gone. Certainly, say again, does this not depend on which of the 3 designations vested in one person should be used? Certainly, the Supreme Military Council must have someone to process the applications, compile papers, and offer advice on the qualifications and so on and so forth. Your Excellency, this is the last paragraph. Your Excellency, my views already expressed regarding other sections cover the remaining sections of the draft. My final submission is this. It has been a battle between this region and the federal government to get this decree in its present form. The federal government has been defeated with heavy casualties. We have won a major victory, and if we sustain minor casualties, we should not throw away that victory. Nobody ever goes into a battle without expecting casualties. I should think that we have hardly sustained casualties in this case. Signed, NU Akpan, SMG, 4/3/1967. If you'd like to be a part of a prayer meeting, we need to pray for this country. Not prayer of Oluwashi. I'm saying prayer of sense. Paul said, I will pray in the spirit, I will pray in understanding. Most of Nigeria's prayer, there's no understanding. I'm actually serious. So one day I'm going to talk about it. We should pray. Not prayer like I'm saying you pray with sense. Because, oh boy, that's the only thing I can do at this moment, because it's just painful, man. Are you guys here? Is anybody here? Because everywhere is just quiet. Just say hello in the comment section so I know that you are with me, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook or here on TikTok. Thank you very much. That last paragraph is actually very powerful, by the way. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you. Thank you. I like that last paragraph is very, very powerful. It says here, Your Excellency, my views already expressed regarding the other sections cover the remaining sections of this draft. My final submission is this. It has been a battle between this region and the federal government to get this decree in its present form. The federal government has been defeated with heavy casualties. We have won a major victory, and if we sustain minor casualties, we should not throw away that victory. Nobody ever goes into a battle without expecting casualties. I should think that we have hardly sustained casualties in this case. Now, I'll read some of the things he also said before we finish, before we go to the other book. It says here, I apologize to readers for having to bore them. By the way, yeah, I already read that he signed, the whole thing was signed NU Akpan SMG, that's Secretary to the Military Government, 4/3/1967. I apologize to readers for having to bore them with the above lengthy extract. I do it to typify the sort of futile and frustrating battle I had to put up, in the honest belief that those with whom I worked sincerely wanted to resolve the Nigerian crisis peacefully. The person who put into words the quote-unquote objections of the lawyers was the lawyer who accompanied me to Benin and fully participated in the discussions leading to the recommendations faithfully embodied in the draft decree. The truth was, as I later discovered to my disillusionment, that they were not interested in anything but secession and eventual war. This matter is further developed in the next 2 or 3 chapters, particularly in the chapter on secession. The Supreme Military Council met as scheduled in Benin and passed the decree without the attendance of the military governor of the East. So he had written that letter on the 4th of March, but they passed that letter later. They promulgated that decree on the 17th of March 1967. So it says here they passed it, they promulgated the decree without the attendance of the military governor of the East. The military governor of the East refused to accept the decree on the ground that it has not received his concurrence as required by the Aburi decisions, a concurrence he willfully withheld. The next chapter explains the background and so on and so forth. In fact, let me read it. The next chapter explains the background and prop to the recalcitrance of the East and the strategy adopted to appear right and to make others appear wrong. There's something that's actually quite sad about what we just read, when you said that one of the lawyers who told Ojukwu not to agree actually accompanied this man, the secretary of the military government, accompanied him to Benin. They made recommendations together in Benin. The recommendations were implemented in the decree, and yet he said no to it because according to him, according to NU Akpan, it says here, I think I should read, it says that they were not, yeah. The truth was, as I later discovered to my disillusionment, that they were not interested in anything but secession and eventual war.